Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to this lecture of keen parajumbles and parajumbles with options. A very, very critical lecture. I'm sure you've been waiting for this lecture. Unfortunately, we could not run this last week. So let's get started. It's going to be a rather long lecture because we're looking at two things. And we're also looking at a very holistic understanding of, this question type, or when we come across paragraphs which and the sentences of which are given to us in jumbled fashion, how exactly do we address that, right? So we're going to take a very holistic understanding. That's why it's going to take us some time. It's not something that we're going to superficially do. All right, let's get started. So I'm going to give you, okay, well, an overview first before we start with some examples. How much of keen parajumbles are tested? You know that there are 4 questions that have been appearing from 2015 to 2019. How is it tested? You have these 5 sentences given. It used to be 5 sentences until CAT 2017. In 2018 and 19, it turned out to be 4 sentences each. You type in the answer using the virtual numeric keypad, and there is no negative marking here, which is the added bonus or the added temptation attached to these questions. Okay. So what about parajumbles with options? How much is tested? You know that in CAT for several years it hasn't appeared, but it is still an integral part of every other aptitude exam. In fact, it was an integral part of CAT as well. It's only in 2015 that CAT shifted gears and went towards parajumbles without options, right? In every other exam, from XAT to IFT to SNAP to NMAT to every other aptitude exam, you know how many questions appear? It can be a good chunk of questions. Consider IFT. 5 to 6 questions can even be more at times. We've even seen past papers several years ago where we've come across 8 parajumbles. So out of the 20 questions of verbal ability in IFT, you can have a good chunk of 5 to 6 questions tested. A 2 to 3 to 4 ZAT can even surprise you with some more, but then we've known that in ZAT, it's roughly been around 26, 27 questions, and therefore the number of parajumbles tend to be roughly around 2 to 4. Generally we see about 3. NMAT 4 can even go up to a 5 or a 6. Every other aptitude exam, it happens to be a core and an important element of the verbal aptitude of every aptitude exam. How is it tested? You are asked to rearrange the given sentences to form a meaningful paragraph, and then you choose the correct option, right? So this is parajumbles with options. And you will find that parajumbles with options can appear as a sentence, one sentence, a single sentence that is broken into fragments and presented. The fragments are presented in a jumbled fashion. So a single sentence that is broken and, the fragments are to be rearranged. You can have a parajumble that has just 4 sentences given that are jumbled up. So A, B, C, D is jumbled up. You can have a parajumble with just 5 sentences, which is jumbled up, which are jumbled up. Now, 5 sentences jumbled up can be a little more challenging than 4 sentences. Obviously, there is more to read. There are more connections to establish. 6 sentences parajumble has been a trend in CAT for several years before they moved into parajumbles without options. So what are these 6-sentence parajumbles? You have either the first sentence fixed and the rest of the sentences are jumbled up, or you have the first and the last sentences fixed and the middle 4 sentences are jumbled up. The middle 4 meaning, the second, third, fourth, and the 5th sentences are jumbled up, right? So you have these various types that you can come across in the various aptitude exams. In fact, the 6-sentence parajumble is what you very often encounter in NMAT. In NMAT, you come across this. The sentence fragment, we've seen in a paper like IFT or even in ZAT. Occasionally, we've seen that a single sentence is broken into parts and jumbled up, right? Okay, so we start with, an understanding of, okay, this was already given. Let's go to the next slide. So we start with an understanding of a paragraph. Let's look at what a paragraph is. Now, before we get into a paragraph, I want you to understand that we're going to first examine paragraphs, all right, paragraphs. And in a why do we want to understand a paragraph? Because when it comes to a parajumble, what are the aspects that are tested? Obviously, your reading skills, your reading ability, your ability to read sentences and comprehend those sentences. But it doesn't stop there. From your ability to read a sentence and comprehend those sentences, we move into, logic and logical patterns. Are you able to make those logical connections? Are you able to see those links of ideas and connect those ideas? And the third, which is, are you able to understand the structure of a paragraph or the structure of the argument in that paragraph? Do you relate to what is being presented by the author, the main idea that is trying to present? Can you, rearrange that? So there are multiple levels at which you can be tested in a parajumble, whether it's with options or without options, right? In both aspects, you will require an understanding of reading ability, your ability to understand links or the logical arrangement of ideas, the typical logical patterns that we find, the typical ways in which ideas are presented. And third, how exactly are paragraphs structured? So when you have multiple, ideas given, different kinds of ideas given, how do you structure them? What are the normal ways in which paragraphs are structured? All right. So we're going to take these things, these aspects that are tested at different levels. We're going to talk about how to relate to that main idea or the main point in a paragraph. Okay. Second, we're going to understand paragraph structures, because when we understand paragraph structures, we will also find that we're able to relate to a lot of logical patterns. And what are those links? What are those devices? What are those ways in which connections are established? How do I connect two sentences? We call that establishing coherence, because after all, you're asked to rearrange the paragraph in a way that, rearrange the sentences into a coherent paragraph. So we're going to look at that as well. And what are the normal devices or aspects that are used to establish coherence or link? You have words that we can call connectors, connecting words, transitional words, etc. You have these keywords that can be repeated. You have pronouns and adjectives, article links, tense links, modifier links, a lot of grammar links as well. So we're going to look at a variety of things today, all right? Okay. So with this understanding, let me present this to you, all right? I want you to read this brief paragraph and tell me. Obviously you cannot tell me now, but assess in your mind what is the feeling that you get when you read this paragraph. Okay, quickly, 15-20 seconds to read this paragraph. Okay, I'm sure it hasn't taken you much time. You don't need much time for this. Now, the first thing that should come into your idea, the first idea that should come into your mind is that, you know, every sentence seems to be talking of a broad subject. And what is that broad subject? Every sentence seems to be talking of something to do with psychology or psychotherapy. Yet I am not able to link each sentence. The first sentence seems to talk about the psychiatric nurse deals with dangerous mental patients. And then suddenly the second sentence seems to move into Sigmund Freud was one of the first doctors to study mental disorders. And then you find that the third sentence, goes on to talk about psychotherapy being well established. It looks like there are some lines missing in between each sentence, right? Between first and second, something seems to be missing. Between second and third, something seems to be missing. So this is a paragraph that can't be called a paragraph, because here is a paragraph that lacks unity. It just doesn't have coherence. The three lines don't connect with each other. Each sentence expresses a different, undeveloped idea, right? Now, let's look at another version of this paragraph. Now, if you can read this, I'm sure there will be a better feeling in your mind. Take a quick look at this. Okay? Let's read every sentence here. Psychiatric nurses deal with dangerous mental patients, pathological personalities who may explode into violence at any moment. For this reason, what is the this reason? That they deal with dangerous mental patients who could explode into violence at any moment. That's why they must remain on guard at all times. They refers to the psychiatric nurses. And then I have descriptions of how patients can get dangerous. So I have the first line, the third line telling me when a patient displays anger or violence, they cannot respond in kind but must instead show tolerance and understanding. Furthermore, they must be able to recognize attempts at deception. A patient can sometimes try to deceive them. Sometimes a mentally ill person, just prior to launching an attack, will act in a completely normal way in order to deceive the intended victim. The nurse must recognize this behavior and be alert for any possible assault, right? So if you look at these last, the third, fourth, and the fifth line, it's giving us examples of how dangerous these patients can get. What are the ways in which they can pose dangers to the psychiatric nurse? Therefore, the nurse must recognize this behavior and be alert. So, what is the key idea here in this paragraph? If I ask you, pick an important sentence in this paragraph, I'm sure you will point towards the second sentence. In fact, maybe the first and the second sentences put together. The nature of the psychiatric nurses, the nature of work of the psychiatric nurses is very dangerous. And therefore, they should be on their guard at all times. They should be alert because they can encounter danger at any time, right? Here is a paragraph that revolves around this one idea. What is the idea? The kind of problem, the kind of challenge that they face in their work, and therefore how important it is for them to be careful in their professional work or professional duties. So you find that there is one central idea, and the rest of the sentences seem to be developing that one central idea. Okay, now this is what we mean by a coherent paragraph. Coherent, clear, a paragraph that develops correctly, logically, and is a complete paragraph. All right. The first one, the previous one, was not a paragraph at all. Okay. Now let's take this ahead. So that means that there is going to be at least, a sentence or a couple of sentences in a paragraph, which I can, which I can regard as the key sentence, the sentence that captures the main idea, right? More or less. This is the main point of this passage of this paragraph. Let's call it something called the topic sentence, right? It's extremely important that in a paragraph, I learn to identify the topic sentence. Does that mean that every parajumble is necessarily a paragraph given to you, a complete paragraph? No, it could be one part of a paragraph, the first part. It could be taken from the middle and it could be just the second part of the paragraph, right? It could also be a complete paragraph. All right. The more we are able to see, when I'm given 5 sentences, which sentence can be identified as the most important sentence and the other sentences revolve around it, the more I'm able to relate to paragraphs, I will find that I'm also able to relate to parajumbles. Okay. So, in a paragraph, I may find the topic sentence being the first sentence of the paragraph. Quite common this is. Most paragraphs, I won't want to use the word most, but you'll find a large number of paragraphs in which the first sentence happens to be the expressing the main idea of that paragraph. Okay. I can have a sentence, I can have a paragraph where the topic sentence or the main idea sentence is somewhere at the end. Okay. I can have a paragraph where it seems to start with a topic sentence. It also seems to end with a topic sentence, right? It starts and ends. I can have a paragraph in which I find that the topic sentence is somewhere in the middle, like those arguments that you looked at, wherein you have a counter argument being made. So author is referring to somebody's idea and then he makes a counter argument, correct? उस तरह के paragraphs. Or I may have a paragraph जिसमें topic sentence is not there at all because it's just a description, it's a narration in which the topic sentence is just implied, not stated. Let's look at these various things, but we are not going to just read paragraphs. We're going to solve them as keen parajumbles. So here is a paragraph, okay, which has been jumbled up for you. Now we're going to do two things. We're going to obviously identify links and make the connections, rearrange these sentences, but at the same time, we will also identify which sentence is the most important sentence here, which sentence seems to convey the main idea. Okay. I'm giving you a minute for this. We have a lot of solving to do today. So I'm giving you a minute for this. Take a look at it. I will, of course, explain it, but quickly give it a reading. All right. Okay. Let me help you with the connections. Okay. Let's look at what these sentences are saying. So it expanded at first at the rate of 1. So I have it, a pronoun. I have to look at what it connects with. At first, at the rate of 1 cubic inch of additional gray matter every 100,000 years, then it doubled, the growth rate doubled. Okay. So very important detail. It doubled again and finally it doubled once more. So there is an there is an at first. So that at first tempts me to start with this, but then it's an it. So when I come across a pronoun, I'll want to look at what is it referring to. It is not mandatory that a pronoun never ever begins a parajumble. It could begin a paragraph or a parajumble. But generally speaking, what is the logic that I come across a pronoun? I want to look at what does it refer to? What's the noun that it refers to? Okay. Is there any noun that it refers to? 500,000 years ago, the rate of growth, which has been mentioned in the first one, hit its peak. Okay, I have number of years also mentioned, the years also mentioned, time period mentioned. Starting from 1 million years ago, all right, the fossil record shows an accelerating growth of the human brain. So here I'm talking about the accelerating growth. It looks to me like it's the it in sentence one refers to human brain, right? Because I'm talking of the accelerating growth of the human brain, and in the first sentence there seems to be some explanation of the accelerating growth at that time. So now if I consider the word time, there are, a time reference is made to, I mean, there's a reference to time made in the first sentence, in the second sentence. So what does at that time refer to? The brain was expanding at the phenomenal rate of 10 cubic inches every 100,000 years. No other organ in the history of life is known to have grown as fast as this. No other organ is supposed to have grown as fast as this. And what does the this refer to? The growth of rate that has been described in the previous lines. So let's start with 3. We start with sentence 3. Let's assume we start with 3. Why? Because 3 is what mentions this for the first time. Correct? 3 mentions, what does it mention? It mentions the human brain for the first time. Okay, yeah. We continue with it expanded at first. Why do I want to continue with it expanded at first and not with 4? Because the 1 million years could very well refer to at that time. But you know that at that time, the sentence also contains at the phenomenal rate. What is the phenomenal rate of growth? When the rate of growth hits its peak. The peak growth is the phenomenal growth of the human brain, which means 4 and 2 are connected. That is, 2 should take me to 4. The at that time here refers clearly to, what does at that time refer to? It refers to 500,000 years ago. Starting from 1 million years ago would be at first, correct? The human brain is it expanded. So what are we left with here? 2, 4 is a connect, 3, 1 is a connect, 5 should end my sequence. And why should 5 end my sequence? Because 5 is what talks about this as fast as this. The this refers to what is described in the previous lines, which means this is my sequence. The sequence has to be 3, 1, 2, 4, 5. All right. Look at the various links we've established. Now, what is the main sentence here? What is the main idea or topic being discussed? The accelerating growth of the human brain, the way in which it grew at a rapid pace, the pace at which over the 100 years, million years, it grew or developed, right? So this is our answer. Let's take a look at the next one. Now, this is an example of topic sentence at the end. Okay, pretty easy one. But look at making those links as well, because with solving every question, we are also understanding how to establish links. Okay. 1 minute for this. All right. So let's look at the sequence here. I'm sure you'll agree with me that, third, sentence three should begin. You will have read it, right? Because this is when this is the sentence that talks about the author or I visiting the restaurant for the first time, right? I visited it for the first time. Then you visit a restaurant, obviously it has to be four because then you order your meal. So no brainer, right? This connection of three with four is a very easy one. You visit a restaurant, you order your meal. Now comes the tricky part. And there's always that one such tricky link in any parajumble. Consider any parajumble. You'll find, that one link is possible, or sometimes you're even able to, if it's four sentences, you're able to find two distinct links, but you don't know which link comes first, which link comes last, right? So there's a confusion in the placement of those links. Now, I know clearly that I should start with the 3 and uske baad 4, correct? Now, what else? Should I continue with 5? Because 4 tells me after I had ordered my meal, the sommelier or the wine steward set before me a wine list of surpassing amplitude and excellence. He sets before me a wine list. So, should it be that I consider 5? I would suggest this one. He suggests one of them, which comes first. Or should it be sentence 1, which says, he pointed out a wine of which I'd never heard, ticketed at a price of one-fifth that of its illustrious neighbors. So after he presents a wine list, should we talk about I suggesting this one or pointing out a wine first and then suggesting? Which is, should it be 5 1 or should it be 1 5? Should it be 1 5 or 5 1? So, how does this logically happen? How does the action logically happen? Logically, you will want to look at first presenting, he's set before me a wine list. And that's why he pointed out a wine. He bent over me and he pointed out a wine. And then says, I would suggest this one, which means it will have to be the 1 5 connection, right? It will have to be the 1 5 connection. So we talk about 3 4, 1 5, and then this to my mind. What does the this here refer to? The this refers to the way in which the sommelier, the wine steward, presents a certain wine to him, a visitor to the restaurant, and how he has also accepted it. This, to the author's mind, is true sophistication. So that is the point that the author is making here with this description. With his entire description or anecdote, he's trying to make this point. Correct? So the problem was in 1 5. The rest of it is easy. Okay. But one more learning here is that 2 is the topic sentence because this is the point that the author is making here. Easy one, not a difficult one. Let's take a look at the next one. All right. Okay. Now here you have 6 sentences. Okay. Not an easy one. But you'll find that the topic sentence starts as well as ends. Now things are getting slightly difficult. The topic sentence starts as well as ends. We'll want to look at what is the topic sentence, what's the idea, because it starts and it also ends. You have the same idea at the beginning, at the end too. All right, take a look at this. Slightly more challenging, okay, but let's see how you get it. Difficult one. I'm sure you found a connection, but I'm also pretty positive that you must be mistaken. It's very easy for us to go incorrect here. Now, this is an example that should teach us how the details are important, how looking for the details. What is our general advice when it comes to RCs? We tell you that an RC must be skimmed. Don't get involved in the details. Read an RC quickly, skimming karo, because the getting the larger idea, getting the main idea, the main point of the author, his primary purpose is more important. And then if I have questions that are very specific, I'll go back to those details, right? I'll go back to the passage and search for the details. But that's not what we say here. Our advice always here is to read carefully. Read so carefully, read very, very closely, because every single thing matters. Every single word matters. You'll find that the connections are established by every detail. All right. We will be taking up some more examples to look into that. But why is the topic sentence first and last here? Why do you find the main idea first and last? If you read all the sentences, you find that there are two sentences which more or less convey the same idea, right? More or less convey the same idea, which is why, because we've been told that the topic sentence starts this as well as ends it, I know I should look for this, correct? So I have a sentence with in other words. When do I use a phrase in other words? When I'm summarizing another idea, or when I'm emphasizing, giving clarity to, or reiterate, that word repeating another idea, correct? In other words. So in other words, everything you feel, think, see, and touch is constantly changing. Now, this sentence seems to be summarizing or giving clarity to sentence 5. Everything is changing. This is a prediction I can make with absolute certainty. Now, this is a prediction. I want to start with this idea, with sentence 5, because the author is making a prediction, and that's where he starts with his thought or idea. And then we find that there are some sentences which describe, you know, how everything is changing. So when I read the other sentences, I find that, so let's mark this here. We looked at, let me not take the text. Okay. We looked at 5 as the beginning. And let's assume 3 is going to end it. Okay. Now, what are the other connections I have? Sentence 1, as human beings, we are constantly in a state of change. So, as human beings, we change. Our bodies change every day. Our attitudes are also constantly evolving. So, as human beings, what is the change that we undergo? Our bodies change, our attitudes change. Okay. Even the clothes we wore a few years ago change, now look strange to us. Even the clothes we wore look strange to us. So our bodies change, our attitudes change. Even the clothes we wore look strange to us, which means I find a connection between 1 and 4, correct? 1 and 4 seem to be giving an example of how human beings change. Why am I linking this up? Because when I look at 2, and what does 2 say? The things we take for granted as absolutes, things which we take as absolutes, unchanging, they are also, the ones that are impervious to change are constantly doing just that. They are also changing. So 2 talks about things. 1 talks about human beings. That's why I connect 1 with 4. I connect 2 with 6, because in 6, I have an explanation or examples of things given. Granite boulders become sand in time. Our buildings become outdated, which means 2 and 6 is a connection, right? 2 and 6 is a 2 and 6 is a connection. So 2 and 6 is an example. 1 and 4 is an example. Now comes that usual problem, which is I can find the links, but I don't know क्योंकि 5 idea present कर रहा है. I don't know whether I should bring the human beings example first, which is 1 and 4, or I should bring the things example first. Should it be 5, 1, 4, 2, 6, 3, or should it be 5, 2, 6, 1, 4, 3? That is our problem. There is a clue here. And if we could, communicate, you would tell me what the clue is. What is the clue that tells you which example should come first? The clue is in the word to. Sentence 2 gives me this word. Things that we take for granted as absolutes, impervious to change, they too are changing. They too are changing. This clarifies to me that 2, 6 as an example should come later, should be placed second. Why? Because when our sentences contain words like also, to, even, they're always placed second. They are to be taken as pieces of information which add to the original information. So, what's my sequence? It should be 5, 1, 4 first, the example of human beings, 2, 6 next because of the word to, and finally comes 3. This is my sequence. Correct? So 5, 1, 2, 6, 3 is my correct sequence here. Confusing because I'm sure a lot of you will have started with sentence 1, but that's not the idea. The only idea that is repeated in 2 sentences happens to be 5 and 3, which is why 5 starts and 3 ends. So what's the main idea? Seen in 5, repeated again in 3. Okay, this is our sequence. All right, let's take a look at the next one and what's going to be our next question. So we looked at topic sentence first, topic sentence last, topic sentence first and last. Let's look at topic sentence in the middle. Those dangerous cat arguments, typical parajumbles tend to be arguments of this kind. Let's take a look at this. Now it's getting a little more difficult, all right? Yeah, please take a look at this. You'll need at least a minute to read this. I'm sure it's a little tricky. But if I ask you what sentence do you want to start with, I'm sure you'll point out to sentence 4. All right. Because this seems to be introducing something, right? But is that the main point of the author? We still don't know. Let's look at it. So, over the centuries, China has often been the subject of Western fantasy, right? So, Westerners have fantasized about China. They've it's been thought of as a very positive thing. That's why it's Western fantasy. There is a reference made to some Westerners. Where are the Westerners we are talking about? You'll find them here. Because of the word travelers, look at the word travelers, some scholars, journalists, and other travelers who are justifiably impressed by the communist achievements. They believe that China is the wave of the future. They're impressed with China's achievements. And they think that it's a compelling alternative to the disorder and materialism of Western society. It's an alternative to Western society. They are impressed with the achievements of China. That's why you can connect the subject of Western fantasy with sentence 3, right? So 4 and 3 is a connection. Now let's take this ahead. Then I have sentence 5 and 1, which seems to be connected. What is sentence 5 talking about? However, in the past 1 year, now here is a thought reverser. You know that when we talk of however ends up contradicting the previous statement. So what is the contradiction here? The Chinese have begun to speak for themselves and they are conveying quite a different picture. The Westerners have some picture, the Chinese are conveying quite a different picture. What is the picture that the Chinese are presenting? In the views of its own people, China is a backward and repressive nation. Now, this is the viewpoint of the Chinese. They are conveying quite a different picture. So, what's the picture here? The picture is that that China is a backward and repressive nation. So that means 5 connects with 1, 5 and 1 is a connection, 4 and 3 is a connection, right? Now is the big problem. As I said, there's always that one problem, one issue, one link that we don't know how to sort out. Human rights were not an issue, they argued. Now, who does this they refer to? Does the they here refer to the travelers who are the Westerners? Which means the Westerners are talking about China in a positive light. So does the they refer to the Westerners or does the they refer to Chinese? Because if it refers to the Chinese, then the Chinese are presenting China in a negative light. So is sentence 2 positive or negative? That's a big question here. Who does they refer to? What does sentence 2 say? Human rights were not at issue. There is no violation of human rights. Human rights is not at issue, they argued, because such Western concepts were not applicable to China. So there is no human right violation happening. So there is no such thing happening. So you can't say that there is some violation of human rights happening. It is not negative. This sentence is positive. That means that the they here refers to the travelers, to the Western travelers. What is their argument? That there is nothing wrong going on in China. Everything is positive. So what is my sequence? My sequence here will have to be, I started with 4. I continued with 3. 2 was my big question mark, but I just figured out 2 is positive, which means I have 3 sentences that talk about something positive. And then I have 5 and 1 talking something negative about China. Correct? 5 and 1 present something negative about China. That makes it 4, 3, 2, 5, 1. So what is the middle topic sentence in the middle? What does this mean here? Which is the topic sentence? When you come across any counter argument, when you come across a contradiction or a counter argument, you should know that is the point that the author is making. Why will I bring in a counter argument if I don't want to highlight that? If I am, I am representing the Westerners' idea here regarding China, I wouldn't talk about what the Chinese think about China. I'm trying to say that contrary to the Westerners' opinion that China is, fantastic, it's an alternative to the Western material world, I'm trying to say that, look, no, the Chinese have a different idea. They think that it's a very repressive place, a place that is backward. It's Asia's Gulag archipelago, something like a forced labor camp. That there is a title of a book that describes Russian forced labor camps. So that's like a forced labor camp. So this is my sequence here, 4, 3, 2, 5, 1. And what is my topic sentence? 5 is my topic sentence, right? So slightly tricky one, very typical of the kind of arguments that you'll come across in CAT, all right? But this is our answer, right? Let's take a look at the next one. Let's move on to the next. And this would be topic sentence implied, a very easy one. You don't even need a minute to read this, but I'm still giving you a minute. Very easy one. Okay. As I told you, it's a very easy one. So I'm not going to give you a lot of time, nor are we going to spend more time here because, there are far more questions we would want to discuss. So I want to start with 2, right? I'm sure you'll agree with me because here is the name mentioned, Captain Robert Barclay, right? He went out at 5 in the morning. Once went out on one fine day, he went out at 5 in the morning to do a little grouse shooting. All right. Then a lot of you would be tempted to take 1 here because it says he did not sleep after this but went through the following day. Remember, we are talking of the following day. The following day is not that day. So I'm only told that he went out in the morning to do grouse shooting. What does he do for the rest of the day? That's what I find in 5. He walked at least 30 miles and then after dinner set out on a walk. That is what brings me to the following day. This is where I will talk about the following day because he did not sleep after this but went through, the following day as if nothing had happened until he walked how many miles? He walked 16 miles to a ball. When I talk of a ball, that is when the idea of a party comes up and he danced all night, correct? So this sentence connects me With the third sentence, he danced all night and then in early morning walked home and spent a day partridge shooting. Finally, he did get to bed, but only after a period of 2 nights and nearly 3 days had elapsed. So finally, that indicates to me that this is the closing sentence. So clearly, we started with two, and then we went on to talk of two ke baad five, five ke baad one, and then one led us to three, and finally comes four. Correct? So 2, 5, 1, 3, 4. This is a narration, a description, correct, of some anecdote, something that has been done by a person. Any description, any narrative normally does not have one single sentence that captures the main idea, but all sentences put together. Take your descriptive paragraphs, you will not have, the main idea explicitly stated somewhere, but you put together several sentences to identify what's the point being made. Correct? So the sentence, topic sentence, or the main idea is implied here. And what is the main idea? What's the point being made? If you look at everything said here, it's describing the way in which Captain Robert Barclay showed a lot of physical endurance. He showed a lot of energy, stamina, physical endurance. Imagine someone who is able to keep himself going without sleep for 2 nights and nearly 3 days. That requires a lot of physical stamina and endurance. That's the point being made here. All right? Right. Let's take a look at the next one. So we've looked at 5 different parajumbles, right? And in each one of them, we looked at the positioning of the topic sentence too, right? Because that was our point, that every paragraph seems to have one sentence which captures the main idea, okay? The more we are able to relate to this, the more easy our understanding of parajumbles can be. Now, the second point regarding parajumbles, particularly key in parajumbles that we want to understand, is that the structure of a paragraph helps us, right? Not, as I told you, not every paragraph is not every parajumble is a complete paragraph given. But the more I'm able to understand how ideas are normally structured in a paragraph, the better I'm able to relate to things. Okay. So when you talk of structure or organization of a paragraph, multiple things come up. Here are the very common ones, the common ways in which structures are created. I could have a time structure, a space structure, a process structure, a paragraph that is organized around a sense of time. So there are words that relate to time, that indicate time, or a paragraph that is describing something to do with a space, with a space, physical space for me, right? It could be maybe a building, an auditorium, it could be a park, it could be a road, correct? There's always something to look for in a space sequence. We'll come to that. Or it could just be a process. What's a process? The way in which an operation is carried out. How do we run this? How do we run this machine? This machine is run in this following way, a process being described. So a step-by-step description. Definition, maybe the author's purpose is to define something. Understanding these things will also help you understand summaries well. The more you are able to relate to paragraphs and their structures, the better your understanding of even a summary question can be. Because when you figure out that, look, the passage, the author is defining something here, you will know that I should give importance to an option that involves the definition, that includes the definition, because that's the purpose of the author here. Or he could just illustrate, give some examples and explain an idea, data, right? Data or statistics के साथ. Classification हो सकता है, multiple types of people exist. Yeah, economies can be of several kinds. This is one economy, that is another, etc. Compare, contrast, right? I could be comparing and contrasting something. Cause effect, a very common one. Pointing out the causes for effects. So how do you place that? The sentences that talk about causes, do they come first? Do they come later? How is the cause effect presentation created? Or that very important argument. Paragraph can just be an argument that the author is making, which means he will refer to somebody else's viewpoint. He will contradict their viewpoint, and then he will establish his idea. Or he could start with establishing his own idea, thus refute somebody else's idea. Arguments are the tricky ones. All these, generally, these words that contradict something, contradictory words like a but, however, yet, they're part of your arguments. Okay. Let's take some examples. Here is a time sequence, right? All you need to do is to figure out, how the time connections are made. But you can't miss out on the main point as well. You'll also have to keep track of that, because sometimes just following the time details might confuse me, okay, might mislead me. Let's take a look at this. All right, 1 minute again, and let's make it quick. Okay, let's look at this. Not a difficult one. I'm sure you will have started with in 1917, because this is the earliest time frame. And what is the discussion all about? The Model T. The Model T lost much of its attraction when its exterior appearance was drastically altered. Now comes the main idea. We're talking about the drastic alteration changes of the Model T. Where else are we talking about alteration? We are talking about alteration in 4, in sentence 4. Electric lightings and starting followed in 1919. So you'll be tempted to take this. But then when you look at sentence 1, that's also talking about alteration. The famous flat-sided brass radiator disappeared, and the new style, altered style, featured all these things. In 4, you have the word followed, which means this is a change that you place, an alteration that you place after you mention 1. correct? So I'll start with 1, all right? So drastically altered, I mean start with 2. 2 leads us to 1, which describes the new style. And then you have further changes happening followed in 1990, right? So 2, 1, 4. Now comes the trick. After a considerable pause, it was replaced by model A. What is that it that we're talking about? Is the it a reference to model T? Yes, because it was replaced by model A. And what was model A? A very conventional machine with wire wheels, etc. What does sentence 5 talk about? And the model, which is the model, is it model A or is it model T? Then continued with little alteration until 1927 when it was finally withdrawn. It was withdrawn and therefore it was replaced by the Model T. Now we have multiple reasons why we want to take 5 first and then 3. As far as alteration is concerned, we are talking of the alteration of Model T. Model T was altered. How was it altered? Described in 1, in 4. Model A was not altered because Model A is referred to as a very conventional machine. Mind you, it's a conventional machine. What do you mean by conventional? Something that is not a new style, doesn't contain any fancies. It's the very ordinary style, traditional style, conventional, no changes. So, Model A should be the last thing we're talking about because 5 talks of the model. And what is the model? The model is again a reference to Model T. It continued with little alteration. We're talking of the alteration of Model T until 1927 when it was finally withdrawn. It was withdrawn, that's why it was replaced by Model A. So, what's the sequence here? We started with 2, we continued with 1 to 1, then 4 to 1, 4, and 5 and 3. That is our correct sequence. Okay. So, yes, the years help me because I understand this narrative is revolving around time. Time factor is very important here. All right. But there is that careful reading. The word conventional very clearly tells me that model A had nothing to do with alteration. All right. Let's look at the next one. Now, I'm not giving you time to read this because I'm just going to give you an overall understanding. Now, what is space sequence? You know, when I'm describing, let's say, a classroom, an auditorium, a hall, or a building, or whatever, you know, when you describe something, it could be that I'm just describing a mannequin. I'm describing a showroom, maybe. I'm describing a toy, right? There is always a direction that is observed. You know, you have one sense of direction. So if you're describing an auditorium, you might start with the entrance of the auditorium. You go on to then move inward towards the stage maybe, and then from the stage you move to the spectator place, right, and describe the place where the audience is seated. If you're describing a room, I might choose to start with the floor and then the roof maybe, or the roof first and then the floor. You know, it could be clockwise, anti-clockwise, east to west, north to south. There's some sort of direction that is normally observed because you're describing, you need to maintain some sort of consistency. It cannot be random and irregular. Always try to sense that direction. You know, here we are talking about a ceramic elf, all right, ceramic elf. And that's what you find in sentence 2. The ceramic elf in our family room is quite a character, and then you're describing him. So when you realize that it's a human-like form that you're describing, a body, a living body that you're describing, you'll want to think of the face first and then face downward, right? And you actually have, you know, you have 5 that talks of his face, a button nose and an unruly snatch of hair, etc. And you think that is the sequence, face downward, then comes beard, then comes arms, then comes slippers, sorry, then comes legs, and then is slippers. But if you've missed this detail in the fifth sentence, that is the sequence you'll present, face downwards. But the fifth one gives us this one sequence, which is they complete Bartholomew's appearance. So what completes Bartholomew's appearance? The button nose with a smudge of gold dust, mischievous black eyes and unruly snatch of a hair. This entire face completes his appearance, which means I'm talking the reverse way, which is I start with the slippers and then I go on to talk about the legs and then the short meaty arms and then the beard and finally come to five. So it is feet upward that the description is proceeding thanks to this one detail which says that it completes Bartholomew's appearance, right? So look for a clue of this kind when you're describing spaces, okay? Maybe not a typical cat type, but then you'll find this in a lot of speed exams, space sequence, parajumbles around space sequences are quite common. Okay, let's now take a look at the next one. So yes, let me tell you what is the sequence, the answer 2, 3, 4, 1, 6, 5, what we discussed, right? Next, definition. When I figure out that the author is going to define something, that is a clue for me. I figure out that acha ideas ko mujhe is tarah se place karne hain. Take a quick look at this, maybe 45 seconds for your reading. Take a look at it. Okay, let's take a look at it. So as I told you, I'm not giving you a lot of time because we can look at more questions that way. Now, why is this a parajumble for a paragraph of definition? Because it starts with this idea. Let's consider the word integrity. When do you talk about let's consider this? Consider this when you're explaining something, when you set out to explain something. Let's consider the notion of a nation. Let's consider the idea of a nation. Let's consider the idea of choosing the best B school, right? When you introduce something, that's when you come up with let us consider. this one particularly, let us consider something is a very key, detail. Now, this very well looks almost like I am answering some question. Someone has raised a question and I am responding to that question. So might even mislead you. Ki very well hai, how can it start? But that is the trickiness. Very well. It's a it's almost like a casual opening. Let's consider the word integrity. But because he's defining the word integrity. So if I ask you, what is the purpose of the author here? His purpose is to define the word integrity. If he's setting out to define the word integrity, then that means that he will give the highest importance to his definition of integrity. So when you look at the other sentences, what do they tell me? Integrity is like the weather. Everybody has an opinion about it, but nobody knows anything about it. Everyone has an idea, an opinion about it. And what is everybody's opinion? Some say that we need to return to the good old days when we had a lot more of it. Others say that we as a nation never have had really enough of it. But as I will use the term, integrity requires 3 steps. This is a complete definition of integrity. So why do we want to say that a sequence here should be starting with 4, okay? We move on to 3, and then we talk of 1, 5, and then 2. Why should we talk of 4, 3, 1, 5? Even if we consider that we want to start with 4, why can't we talk of 2, which is his definition, and then go on to say maybe 1, 5, and then finally it's like the weather, everybody talks about it. Or even have, instead of 1, 5, 3, why can't it be 5? Sorry, we can't start with 5. I mean 1, okay, 1, or let me rewrite this. So why can't it be 3, 1, 5, right? Why can't it be anything of this kind? Why should it necessarily be 4, 3 and then 1, 5, 2? Why should 2 come at the end? After all, it's his definition. You'll want to say that, correct? So 4 se start kiya, and then let's consider the word integrity. This is how I will use the term. This is what integrity means. And then some say this, others say this, integrity is like the weather, everybody talks about it. 2 reasons. One, his purpose here is to define the word integrity. If he first presents his definition, which you will find is a complete comprehensive definition, देखो, कितना comprehensive है ये. तो अगर उसका definite, if his purpose is to define here, and you can see he gives a comprehensive definition, then he will not dilute that notion by first giving his definition and then talking about some say this, others say this, everybody has an opinion. That idea will get diluted. He doesn't want to dilute his definition because he wants it to be impactful. How do I give more weightage to my definition when I say it's like the weather, everybody, sabka opinion hota hai. Some say this, the others say this, but integrity kisi koi janta nahi, integrity kya hai? Integrity is actually this. He goes on to finally define it. So, because you want to maintain the impact and not dilute the sanctity of this definition by the author, 2 should be placed last. All right. Second reason why you cannot have 3 at the end is, when you have a sentence like this, which appears like it's concluding, some say this, others say this, therefore integrity is like the weather, everybody talks about it. You need a conclusion word there. The sentence has no conclusion word, which means I cannot place this at the end. This should be something that comes, close to the start. Let's consider the word integrity. Everybody has an opinion about it. It's like the weather. Some have this opinion, some have that other opinion. So I'm making light of it. I'm not giving it much significance. I'm saying, others have, meaningless opinions, but integrity is actually this, and people don't understand it well, right? So 43152 should be our answer, right? Okay, so good understanding here regarding how you logically place ideas. Let's take a look at the next one. So, the way in which I relate to a paragraph, understand what it's trying to say, what is the purpose of the author, all this will help me in arranging sentences. Okay, a quick look at this, because then we're going to look at logic and actually take some past cat questions. How has cat presented parajumbles with the with options and without options. All right, with options too, we need to discuss that as well. Now, again, that challenging one, argument. Okay, yeah, I think we need just 2 minutes to understand this. I'm giving you a minute to read so that you're able to build some familiarity. Quickly, a minute. Okay, so again, a tough one, right? Not an easy one, but let's look at the links. So, if you've read all the sentences, I don't want to start with, maybe I might want to start with one. Okay, I might think of starting with one. I want to look at what this refers to in three. I want to understand what such refers to in four. Okay. Five might not want to start because it seems to be explaining something in any way. We'll park five. Six, many of you will want to start with it, six. But then it's only when you read it carefully, you figure out that we are talking of the new hygienic method of death by injection. And the method of death by injection is mentioned somewhere else. So let's start with two. Let's start with 2. The death penalty is barbaric. It's very cruel, primitive. The death penalty is very cruel and primitive. How is it cruel and primitive? What do these opponents of death penalty say? Why do they call it cruel or primitive? Because they come up with horrifying tales of how death doesn't happen instantly. Tales of lingering death on the gallows, faulty electric chairs, etc. So the death penalty is barbaric. There are people, opponents of capital punishment, who horrify with tales of such death that doesn't happen instantly. That's why they oppose it. Partly in response to such protests, the horrifying tales that they spoke of. Let me put it the other way around. So partly in response to such protests, you had something new coming up. And what's that new thing? Execution by lethal injection. What is lethal injection? The condemned person is put to death painlessly without ropes, etc. So 4 is explained further in 5. What is this painless injection? You know, the lethal injection, painless death. Okay. Now comes, so there is death by lethal injection that people have come up with, because you were always criticizing that death doesn't happen instantly, it's painful, etc. Did this answer the objection of the death penalty opponents? So people came up with a new method of killing. Did this new method, painless method of killing, answer the objections of the death penalty opponents? Of course not, is what the same sentence says. Of course not. Why? Why of course not? Because the New York Times published an editorial which attacked the new hygienic method of death by injection and stated that execution can never be made humane through science. So what does sentence 6 mean? That they came up with a painless death, a method of painless death, but they were not satisfied. The death penalty opponents were not satisfied with that, because they said that it's not about painless death. We believe you can never kill a person. Killing a human being can never be made humane. We are against the very killing process. It is not that we are against the method of killing. We are against capital punishment itself. All right. So this is our sequence. Tough one. Okay, pretty challenging. You had to look carefully for the sequence, for the links. All right. Okay, let's take a look at another one. You know, I'm rushing you people a little, but you know, that's important. I want to pack in as many things as we can here. Okay. Comparison, fairly okay. You know, I just want you to understand one thing here, which is, if I'm comparing X to Y, you know, I'm comparing X to Y. Why am I comparing X to Y? Why is this comparison of Y brought in? The comparison of, or the example of Y is brought in because I want you to understand X better. What is the point I'm making here? X is the point I'm making. I want you to understand X better, which is why I bring in a comparison or a contrast of X with Y. So Y is not significant. Remember that. The compared thing is not the significant thing. The thing that we are talking about is more important. Correct? The comparison is only meant for you to understand it. So that's one thing. Okay. That means that here, you know, let's do this together. Okay. All right. Okay. So some issue there. So what are the important details? You know, let's read all the sentences. A normal glazed window lets us keep our house warm by keeping out cold air. So I'm talking of what a normal glazed window does. In such a way, in such a way, so you can see the comparison there. The Earth's atmospheric window helps to keep our planet to a comfortable temperature by holding back radiated heat and protecting us from dangerous levels of ultraviolet light. The atmosphere of Earth acts like any window. You know what is important here? Are we talking of a window here, or are we talking of the atmosphere of Earth? We are talking here of the atmosphere of Earth, correct? Which means, okay, some issue there. I'm stuck with the right. Which means that I will want to start with a sentence that brings in the point I'm making. This paragraph is meant to describe the atmosphere of Earth. I bring that in first. And another important thing that I find here is that sentence 3 talks about the atmosphere of Earth acts like any other window in serving two important functions. So there is function 1 and there is function 2 that is mentioned. What is function 1? To let light in and to permit us to look out. The second is to guard Earth from dangerous or uncomfortable things. So here I have sentence 3, which introduces, so sentence 3 introduces the comparison and talks of two important functions that the atmosphere of Earth presents. It serves two important functions. What is function 1? To let light in. What is function 2? To guard the Earth. Now I have a sequence presented in one of the sentences, which means I will want to follow that sequence. I will want to bring up a sentence that talks about function 1 first, and then go on to talk about sentences that present function 2. Which sentence presents function 1? What is function 1? To let light in. A normal glazed window lets us keep our house warm by keeping out cold air. In such a way, the Earth's atmospheric window helps to keep our planet to a comfortable temperature by holding back extra light and heat. That is function 1, which means 3 ke baad I will talk of 1 and 2, which captures function 1. And then what does 4 talk about? Just like a window which prevents rain, dirt, and unwelcome insects, scientists have discovered that space has great many dangerous things which our atmosphere guards us against. And that is function 2, which means my sequence here is 3, 1, 2, 4. Function 1, function 2. All right. This is our correct sequence. So remember two learnings here. One, if I have a sequence mentioned in any sentence of a parajumble or a paragraph, I will ensure that I follow that sequence in the subsequent sentences. Two, if I'm making a comparison or a contrast, I'd prefer to start not with the compared with thing or the contrasted with thing, but I'd prefer to start with the thing that I'm talking about. The comparison is secondary. The important thing here is the atmosphere of Earth, not the window. So I don't want to start with 1 or so, right? 3, 1, 2, 4 is our answer, right? Let's take a look at the next one. Okay. So what did we understand? You know, plenty of things. Actually skipped a few things here. We looked at the various ways in which ideas can be put together, time, space, process sequence. I'm going to give you an example of process sequence in the subsequent slides. Definition, illustration, classification, no example taken because they are easy. Comparison, cause, effect, argument, right? We looked at quite a few examples, all right? This is to understand how paragraphs can be organized. Now the third and the very important point, which will also take us to parajumbles with options. Coherence. How do we form links? If you look at every question that we solved, we've formed links. We've looked at connectors, transitional words. We've looked at repeated keywords. We've looked at pronouns. We've looked at adjectives. We've looked at articles, tense, modifiers, multiple things, right? Now, coherence or establishing clarity, one, establishing, connections, very often is done with connecting words and phrases. All right, extremely important. What are these connecting words and phrases? They clarify relationships between sentences. Okay, so if I have a particular word connecting me with the next line, then I know that a certain word that comes in clarifies a certain relationship between sentences. For example, I could think of sentences that show, words that establish similarity between two sentences. Likewise, moreover, similarly, common one, we know this. Sentence words that connecting words that show contrast, but however, in contrast, nevertheless, on the other hand, however, yet, showing results or effect accordingly as a result, because consequently, pretty similar to drawing conclusions, showing results, drawing conclusions as a result, finally, in brief, in conclusion, in short, summarize. Adding ideas together, when you just have something like, when you even have that word and as a conjunction, just adds ideas. Also, even, besides, to, right? All these words, moreover, furthermore, in addition, pointing out examples, for example, for to illustrate, for instance, we know this. But something that's absolutely new to us is this, showing emphasis or clarity. What does a phrase like above all do? Above all, after all, in fact, besides, indeed. What does a word like indeed do? The students were not prepared for their YouTube lecture today. The students were not available or were now not there for the YouTube session today. Indeed, they didn't even know about their YouTube session. Or the students joined very late for the YouTube session today. In fact, they didn't even know that they had a YouTube session. Look at how an in fact, indeed, above all, after all, how they emphasize or give you clarity on the previous idea. What are they doing? They're trying to clarify the previous idea. They're trying to emphasize on the previous sentence or the idea given in the previous sentence, right? Even something like that is, okay? That is usually used to explain the previous idea, correct? Give you clarity there. So a very important set, something that we don't understand clearly, but something that is used much in, connections to be established between ideas and sentences. Indicating time, we know this, at times, then, after, later, immediately, meanwhile, they're all indicative of time. Conceding a point, very interesting one. How do you concede a point? You'll find this in an argument, counter argument. When you have somebody's idea mentioned, okay, someone's viewpoint mentioned, of course that is right, of course the economists are right in giving us this data, granted that they are right, admittedly they are right, okay, but then you come up with your own argument. Wherever you are accepting another viewpoint, you concede, accept a viewpoint given to somebody else's idea, you end up having your own viewpoint brought in later, correct? So these words, particularly the ninth and the seventh one, these are words that we are not very familiar with, right? You will want to know all of them. Be very clear with these connecting words and phrases, because these are the words and phrases that help you establish those links, particularly make you understand how these two sentences are connected, because they clarify relationships and each word has a certain function to perform, right? Remember this, a very important one. Second, repeated keywords. I think we've looked at a number of sentences, number of parajumbles where we found the keywords are repeated. That particular word, a word that talks about, let's say, we spoke of opponents of capital punishment. You know, who are these opponents of capital punishment? There are people who oppose capital punishment. And then the next line says, these opponents of capital punishment. You know, so opponents of capital punishment are the repeated keywords. When I find certain words repeated, I will want to follow that because I know that is how the idea develops. Okay. And then something that's extremely common, pronouns and demonstrative adjectives. What are the pronouns? We know that personal pronouns. So, you know, first person, second person, third person pronouns, I, you, we, us, me, my. And then you have, you know, second person, you, yours, yourselves, you know. Uh, you have the third person, he, she, it, him, his, her, hers, you know, and her, himself, herself, and then the plural, they, them. All of these are pronouns, but it doesn't stop there. You have more pronouns. You have pronouns like this, that, these, those, such, referring to something, pointing out to something. You have pronouns like you've discussed all this in the pronouns lecture. You have pronouns like, you know, some, many, you know, it's always a reference made to some noun, some, many, you know, that entire sanam, none, all, most, several, few, both, everyone, everybody, each, either, neither, all of them refer to something. So following these pronouns and looking at what they refer to is important. Okay, right. With this understanding, let's go to the next slide and take a look at. So the common transitional devices, this is what they do, correct? We just discussed this. You know, this is what I mentioned with the previous slide. Next. Let's spend some time understanding parajumbles with options too. You know, when I have parajumbles with options, while links and all these things are extremely important for me, it is also very important for me to take the help of the given options. So my approach is different. Yes, of course, understanding of paragraph will help me, but then I have options given. So that makes my job easier. When you have a parajumble with options, you know it is far, far more easier than a parajumble without options. And every other exam of yours gives you parajumbles with options, which means I should know how to approach them, right? So let's look at an approach, a quick approach, an overall approach, all right? So what do? It is important that I quickly scan the options because I want to see if the options are going to help me with an opening line. I have three options starting with A, or I have three options starting with D. I have just one option starting with B. Or let's say I have two options starting with C, two options starting with D. That still narrows down my reading. It makes me read sentence C first, it makes me read sentence D first. Because one of these sentences should start my sequence, right? Why do I want to start the sequence? Why do I want that opening line? Because the moment I pick an opening line, I get a start, I know how to, you know, arrange this entire thing. Parajumbles, if nothing, are, you know, puzzles. They're also puzzles. We looked at paragraph structuring, paragraphs, links for forming links, all of that. But then you should remember that if you go back to the history of CAT and look at parajumbles with options given, you'll find that they are puzzles. They're meant to be problem solving things, right? They're not just about establishing links, not just about, you know, they are very much about establishing links, but they are not a complete sequence given or a proper paragraph given. You'll find that there are missing things. It's like, you know, I have a jigsaw puzzle given to me, but with a couple of pieces missing. Maybe the jigsaw puzzle is supposed to have 7 pieces, and then two of these pieces are missing, right? So you should keep this in mind and remember that trickiness or logicality can always be a part of this. So quickly scan all options. Look for possibilities of opening or concluding sentences. Read all these opening and concluding sentences and try to develop the sequence. You know, when will I look for concluding sentence? I don't get an opening sentence. So I look at all the options. I find all options end with the same sentence, or I find three options end with the same sentence, right? If you cannot find an opening or a concluding sentence, look for a link, right? Between the several statements, look for a pair you can establish, read the options, look at where this link comes, try to narrow down your options and eliminate the incorrect ones, okay? Let's take a look at some of these scenarios. So we're going to examine three cases here. Case one, you find a probable opening sentence. Case 2, you find a probable concluding sentence. Case 3, you find links between statements, right? Let's take a look at the first one. Now, before that, remember, we just went through all of this and we're doing it again because we're looking at parajumbles with options. So links can be idea based, links can be grammar based, links can be logic based, right? We looked at idea based links because that's where we discussed structuring of paragraphs, how paragraphs are organized, etc. right? हाँ, अभी हम ग्रामर बेस्ड देखने वाले हैं ज्यादातर एंड लॉजिक आल्सो किस तरह का लॉजिक कैन बी टेस्टेड बाय कैट. So what are the grammar links that we come across? We have the pronouns links, tense link, article links, yes, definite, indefinite article, conjunction links, modifiers, right? All of these things. That's why we say grammar is so very important. Even if, grammar is not directly tested in CAT, grammar has its significance in a lot of other things, okay? Now, case one, you find a probable opening sentence, just 4 sentences. So I'm not giving you time to read, but let's look at it. One look at the options, and what do I find? A can be my opening sentence. B can be my opening sentence. C can be my opening sentence. Again, B. So D cannot be my opening sentence because none of the options present D to me, right? Now I have to read A, B, C. Let's start reading A, B, C. A, this is prime elephant country. When I have this word, this pronoun here, I want to look at what it refers to, right? Which noun does it refer to? Or does it refer to a noun? Is there a noun here? B, late March in Quava Sanctuary, the world is all sunshine, crisp air, and flowering trees. I have a noun here. We're talking about a sanctuary. Maybe this refers to Quava Sanctuary. Perhaps. Let's look at that. But in the early 1900s, elephants vanished from this open, rugged scrubland along the Kalahari. I've read 3 sentences. I don't want to start with but, because but, this sentence also talks about this open, rugged scrubland. And what is the rugged scrubland that we're talking about? Quava Sanctuary. Quava Sanctuary is this, mentioned again in sentence A, right? So I want to start with B because B starts the idea. Quava Sanctuary, it's a sanctuary for animals. The world is all sunshine, crisp air, and flowering trees. This is prime elephant country. What is prime elephant country? This is where a lot of elephants were living. This is mainland, important land for elephants. That's where the whole idea comes up. But in the early 1900s, elephants vanished from this land. This is where this was main homeland for elephants. But in the early 1900s, elephants vanished from this open, rugged scrubland. And that is where I find today, in an ambitious conservation step, we're not talking of anything else here, but conservation. And conservation can only come in if I first talk of elephants vanished. That is where the difference between early 1900s and today occurs, right? Early 1900s, elephants vanished. Today, in an ambitious conservation step, work is on here. And what does the here refer to? The sanctuary. Work is on here to bring back the majestic beast. What beast? The majestic beast. Why the? The second reference to elephants. Elephants have been mentioned first time reference. The second time reference becomes defined, definite article, right? That means my answer here should be one that starts with B, cannot be BC, has to be BADC. That's our answer, right? So pretty easy one, but we were looking at a certain approach here, which is first look at the options, narrow down what you think can be an opening sentence, and then try to establish the sequence. The links again are important. Okay. Let's look at case 2. Okay, the second case. And what is our second case? You find a probable concluding sentence. Let's say I am not able to start the sequence. Okay, I don't find something to start the sequence. But one look at the options and I very clearly find a sentence that ends the sequence. What is the, look at the options and what do you find here? You find that B ends the sequence, right? So now if B ends the sequence, let's look at other things. What is, let's read B first. Let's get clarity on what the ending looks like. But, I have a but, reverser, which means the sentences that come before it should be saying something else because last sentence is contradicting, right? But flyers have benefited from the fierce competition which has slashed the fares charged by the ones, that's also very important, the once pampered state airlines. We're not talking of anything, there is an article here, the once pampered state airlines. Next. So, we're talking about airlines here and somebody has benefited, flyers have benefited. So I can almost anticipate somebody else has not benefited. If flyers have benefited, someone else has not benefited. And if flyers have benefited from the slashed fares, then maybe the airlines has not benefited from something, right? Let's look at it. So I start reading sentence A. Most are small. Most is a pronoun. It should refer to something. I'll want to park that there. Most are small. Many have had a bumpy ride. That's also a pronoun, refers to something. Sentence C. Lined up cheekily at airports across Europe, beside planes bearing familiar logos like British Airways and Lufthansa, are jets operated by carriers with names like EasyJet, Debonair, Virgin Express. Lined up cheekily at airports, what do you find? Beside planes bearing familiar logos, bigger logos, well known, well reputed logos like British Airways and Lufthansa are other jets operated by carriers with such names, which are not well known. And what does sentence D tell me? Only 20 of the 80 airlines started up, of the 80 airlines started up since 1993 remain. Their ranks are thinned by the difficulty of obtaining landing slots and by high air traffic control costs. They are not able to obtain a landing slot. They are not able to pay the high ATC costs, the air traffic control costs, the fee to be paid to the airport. They're not able to deal with all this. That is why most of them have had a bumpy ride, a challenging time, a difficult ride, not a one-time flight, but a challenging operational time. They've not been able to operate themselves successfully. So they have had a bumpy ride. What is the challenge they have faced? The difficulties of obtaining landing slots and high traffic control costs. So A and D are connected. Where do I position C? C starts because, why do I want to say C starts and C connects with many or most? Because of this word cheekily. It's extremely important for you to read carefully. I think we've made this point so many times. But adverbs, adjectives, these are words that bring in the tone of the author. The tone of the author is so important. That gives me so much clarity and insight into what he says. Lined up cheekily. Do you know what that word cheekily means? He doesn't approve of the way in which these smaller planes are parked beside bigger familiar names. Cheeky is a word that means how dare you, audacity dekho aapka, right? How audacious. guts of the wrong kind, brashness, rashness. They are parked cheekily. Why? Why doesn't he appreciate that? Because they are newer, younger airlines. They are airlines that are, they don't have popular names. They're not familiar logos. And they're small, they've had a difficult operational time. Many of them had started, but only 20 of the 80 airlines started remain. Their ranks are thinned because, they cannot face the challenges of operating themselves, right? So it's almost like he is not appreciating uska tone regarding these smaller airlines is negative, right? So that is where I should start with C. C takes me to A takes me to D, the bumpy ride takes me to the problems that they face. So that is our answer. Starting with C, and you have just two options here, but C, D nahi hoga, C, A hona chahiye, which makes B our correct answer. All right. So this is another approach wherein I look for the closing sentence and then I establish all the typical links. All right. Now, a quick look at, let's assume a scenario where I find no beginning sentence or no closing sentence. I'm not very sure what sentence should start, what sentence should end. What do I do then? I look for I look for some sort of link. I look for some sort of link, and that is what we are doing here. Now, in this one, uh, okay, it's past 9. I think you also have your analysis scheduled. Let's do one thing. Let's wrap it up with this question. I do have some more input to give to you, right? And that input will come in the form of how the logic or trickiness can be discussed, can be tested, how cat questions in the past, cat parajumbles in the past have actually tested you on trickiness and logic. So we're actually going to examine some cat questions, but I think we will park this for now. I'll continue with the next lecture, right? We will just take a quick look at case 3. So case 3 is all about making links, and we've discussed so many links, right? So many sentence questions which give us links. So what are the links that I find here? I find a very strong link in B and D. Why is BD a link to me? At first, they, there's a pronoun, but then the use of the pronoun is still justified here. At first, they look like the perfect pets, exotic, quiet, and tidy. But now look at the contrast. But lizards and other pet reptiles can harbor a salmonella bacteria that makes people sick. So I find a very strong link in BD. I find a very strong contrast, that very dramatic opening. They look perfect, everything is so ideal, but they actually are dangerous. They harbor a salmonella bacteria that makes people sick. So I found BD. But one problem here is that I also find BD in option C. Okay. So should I have BD coming later? Should I have BD starting my sequence or should it come later? For which I will need to understand what AC says. A talks about people can get infected by handling reptiles and then touching their mouths or an open cut. And C says a study estimates that in 1995, there were as many as 6,700 reptile-caused salmonella infections. What do I want to, what's the connection? In the first place, let me look at where do I place C, where do I place A? What does A talk about? A tells me how people get infected. How do people get infected? They get infected by handling reptiles and then touching their mouths or an open cut. Whereas C tells me that there are as many as X number of salmonella infections. Before I talk about how one can get infected, it is important for me to talk about how salmonella infections occur. Or it is important for me to talk about how there are salmonella infections. Unless I mention the word infections, salmonella infections, how can I go on to talk about how a person gets infected? Which means, I am talking about a salmonella bacteria that makes people sick. But how does it make people sick? How dangerous is the bacteria? The bacteria can cause salmonella infections, which is a DC link. Repeated keywords, you can also consider that. Salmonella bacteria cause salmonella infections. Then comes the part about how they get infected, which means I should start with BD, which is that dramatic opening. And then I go on to talk about how this salmonella bacteria causes salmonella infections. How are those infections? How do those infections occur? Right? Which is BDCA. Pretty tricky one, right? I'm sure if you're allowed to discuss, there will be a lot of things you will post. But nevertheless, this is an approach to understanding how, using the options, I can form links, narrow down the options, right? So, three cases that we discussed. As I told you, I have plenty of other things to talk about, at least another, say, 4 or 5 different questions to look at. But we'll do that in our subsequent session. And our subsequent session, that is your last lecture of um, out of context questions and summaries, right? We will spend enough time there, but we'll also take a 15 minutes of that lecture to understand the spending aspect regarding parajumbles with options, particularly when I have options given, right? All right. So with this, we close the lecture. We did exceed a lot of time today. I think we're 10 minutes behind, beyond our schedule, beyond 9. So thank you so much. Let's meet again in the next lecture. And your next lecture of verbal is scheduled for this week itself. All right. So please come prepared for that. Thank you so much and good night. Please do join us for the analysis of exact cat 3. Right. Thank you.